The massive chamber of the Galactic Council gleamed under the light of 3 artificial suns. 12 huge chairs, each designed for a different species, formed a circle around the central projection platform. The air felt heavy with tension as the emergency meeting began. Admiral Kate Thompson, Earth's representative, sat quietly in her chair, the smallest of the 12. She watched as the other representatives shifted uneasily in their seats. Something had them worried, and that itself was concerning. These were species that prided themselves on never showing fear. The council leader, a tall being with metallic scales named Thax, stood up. His voice boomed across the chamber. "We face a threat unlike any we have seen in the past 1,000 years. The void locusts have returned." The projection platform came to life, showing a massive swarm of creatures moving through space. They looked like giant insects with crystalline wings that sparkled against the darkness. Each one was the size of a small ship, and there were millions of them. They have already destroyed 3 mining outposts in the outer sectors. Thax continued. The swarm grows larger with each system they consume. Our predictions show they will reach the core worlds within 60 days. Kate noticed how the warrior representatives immediately straightened in their seats. The void locusts represented a chance for glory in battle, exactly what their cultures valued most. General Kraz, representing the Battleborn Empire, stood up. His armor clinked as he moved. "My fleet stands ready. We will crush these beasts in open combat and add their destruction to our songs of victory." Several other representatives roared in agreement. Their species had built their civilizations on combat prowess, turning warfare into an art form. They saw every problem as a battle to be won. Kate raised her hand to speak. The chamber fell silent, but not out of respect. Several representatives didn't even bother hiding their smirks. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as the species that always ran from a fight. They called Earth's military the masters of retreat. "Perhaps we should study the swarm's behavior before we engage them," Kate suggested. "If we understand their patterns, we might find a better solution than direct combat." General Kraz laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Typical human cowardice, always looking for ways to avoid battle. This is why your species will never be truly respected in the galaxy." "The general is right," another representative added. "The humans joined our council because we needed their trade networks, not their military wisdom. They should leave matters of combat to the warrior races." Kate kept her face neutral, even as the chamber filled with sounds of agreement. She had served in Earth's space fleet long enough to know that rushing into battle wasn't always the answer. But these species wouldn't understand that. Not yet. Thax raised his hand for silence. "The combined fleets of our warrior races will launch an assault within 10 days. The humans may observe from a safe distance, as is their—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Custom." The meeting continued as the warrior races planned their attack. They argued over who would lead the charge, who would get the honor of first blood, and how they would divide the glory. Nobody noticed Kate quietly taking notes about the swarm's movement patterns shown in the projection. As the meeting ended, Kate walked toward her ship. Captain James Marshall, her second in command, fell into step beside her. "They're going to get themselves killed, aren't they?" he asked quietly. Kate nodded. "They're seeing this all wrong. Those creatures aren't an invading army. They're acting like animals following instinct, but the council species are too proud to consider that. They only see another enemy to defeat. Should we try to stop them?" "No," Kate sighed. "They won't listen. Not until they learn the hard way. But we need to be ready when that happens. Tell the fleet to maintain observation distance and record everything. We're going to need that data." As they watched the warrior race's ships prepare for battle, Kate couldn't help but wonder how many would have to die before the council realized that sometimes the bravest action wasn't charging into battle. It was having the wisdom to step back and find a better way. The gathering storm was about to break, and only the cowards seemed to notice the lightning. Captain James Marshall stood on the bridge of the human observation vessel Prudence, watching the massive alien fleet gather for battle. The ship's viewing screen showed thousands of warships from the warrior races forming up into attack positions. Their ships were all angles and weapons, built for combat, not survival. "They're really going to do it," his first officer, Linda West, said quietly. 5,000 ships against a swarm of space monsters, and not one of them has bothered to study the enemy. James nodded, keeping his eyes on the tactical display. The void locusts were visible now, a massive cloud of crystalline shapes that turned and shifted like a school of fish. Their wings caught the light of nearby stars, creating beautiful but terrifying patterns in the darkness. "Start recording," he ordered. "Full spectrum analysis. If this goes as badly as the Admiral thinks it will, we'll need every bit of data we can get." The warrior race's attack began with a massive volley of energy weapons. Beams of light cut through space, striking the front of the swarm. Hundreds of void locusts died instantly, their crystal bodies shattering into space dust. For a moment, it seemed like the direct approach might work, but then the swarm changed. "Sir," Linda called out, "the swarm's formation is shifting. They're adapting." James watched as the void locusts moved with impossible coordination. The swarm split into smaller groups, each moving in different patterns that made them harder to hit. It was like watching a single organism think and react. The warrior races pressed their attack, refusing to adjust their tactics. Their rigid battle formations, perfected over thousands of years of ship-to-ship combat, were useless against an enemy that moved like living smoke. "Incoming transmission from Admiral Thompson," the communications officer announced. Kate's face appeared on the screen. She looked concerned but not surprised. "Are you seeing this, Captain?" "Yes, Admiral. The swarm is displaying clear signs of collective intelligence. They're not just animals. They're a network. Each individual is part of a larger whole. Keep recording," she ordered. "I want to know every pattern, every reaction. We're watching nature at work here, not warfare." The battle continued to unfold, but it was quickly becoming a massacre. The void locusts had surrounded several battle groups, their crystalline bodies releasing bursts of energy that cut through even the strongest shields. "Sir," Linda called out, "General Kraz's flagship is taking heavy damage. They're being overwhelmed." James watched as the proud general's ship, covered in combat honors and victory marks, was swarmed by hundreds of locusts. The massive vessel's shields flickered and died. "They need to retreat," James muttered. Why won't they retreat? But he knew why. The warrior races had built their entire societies around never backing down. Retreat was shame. Retreat was weakness. Even as their ships were torn apart, they continued to fight. "Captain," Kate's voice came through again. "Move the Prudence back another 10,000 kilometers. The swarm's reaction sphere is larger than we thought." James gave the order to fall back, ignoring the mocking messages from the remaining warrior ships about human cowardice. As they pulled away, the tactical display told the story. Out of 5,000 ships that started the battle, barely 800 remained. "Send a message to all surviving ships," Kate ordered. "Offer them escort to safe distance if they withdraw now." Only a handful accepted the offer. The rest fought on until their ships went dark. As the battle ended and the swarm moved on, James stared at the field of debris that had once been the pride of the warrior races. All that combat experience, all that advanced technology, wasted because they couldn't adapt. "Send all our data to Earth Command," he ordered, "and prepare a full report for the Council, if there's anyone left to read it." Linda nodded, then paused. "Sir, what do you think the Council will do now?" James watched the swarm disappearing into the distance, growing larger from consuming the wreckage of the battle. Now they'll have to listen to the cowards, because we're the only ones who bothered to watch and learn instead of rushing in to die." The Prudence turned around, carrying its valuable data back to where Admiral Thompson waited. The real work was about to begin, and this time, Humanity's greatest weakness would become its greatest strength. The emergency session of the Galactic Council felt different this time. The massive chamber, usually filled with proud boasts and challenges, was quiet. More than half of the warrior representatives were missing, their seats empty monuments to their sacrifice. Those who remained looked broken, their pride shattered like their fleets. Admiral Kate Thompson walked to the center of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The data gathered by the Prudence played in the air around her, showing the battle from every angle. No one spoke as they watched their mighty armada die again in the replay. 4,203 ships lost, Kate said quietly. Over 300,000 crew members dead. And the swarm is now 30% larger from consuming the wreckage. General Kraz, one of the few warrior leaders to survive, slumped in his seat. His armor was still scared from the battle. "What else can we do?" he asked, his voice hollow. "We threw everything we had at them. Our strongest weapons, our best warriors." "Perhaps," Kate suggested, "it's time to try something different." She gestured, and the display changed to show detailed scans of the Void Locust's movement patterns. Captain Marshall's observations have revealed something interesting. The swarm isn't just attacking randomly. They're following a path. The display zoomed out, showing the swarm's trajectory over the past month. "See these course corrections. They're not random. The swarm is following old space lanes, paths that existed long before our civilizations reached the stars." Dr. Robert Wilson, Earth's leading xenobiologist, stepped forward. His plain clothes stood out among the military uniforms and ceremonial armor. "We believe the Void Locusts are migratory creatures," he explained. "They're not invading our space. We built our colonies in their path." A low murmur filled the chamber. The warrior races had never considered this possibility. To them, every unknown creature was either prey or enemy. "So what do you suggest?" Thax asked, his metallic scales dulled with exhaustion. "We cannot simply abandon our worlds." Kate nodded to Dr. Wilson, who brought up a new display. "We've developed a plan called Operation Shepherd. Instead of fighting the swarm, we'll redirect it, like ranchers guiding a herd around populated areas." The chamber erupted in protests, though weaker than before. More human cowardice. Someone shouted, but their heart wasn't in it. It's hard to mock cowardice when courage had led to such devastating losses. "Our ships will use a combination of electromagnetic pulses and artificial pheromone trails," Kate continued, ignoring the protests. "We've already identified several natural space corridors that could safely channel the swarm away from populated systems." "And if your herding fails?" General Kraz demanded. "If the swarm turns on your ships, then we'll retreat," Kate said simply. "We'll fall back, regroup, and try a different approach. Because that's not cowardice, General. That's wisdom." She looked around the chamber, meeting each representative's eyes. "You called us cowards because we prefer to avoid unnecessary fights. But tell me, what's braver? Dying in a glorious but futile charge, or facing ridicule and scorn while working to find a real solution?" The chamber fell silent again. The warrior races had never thought of bravery in these terms. Finally, Thax stood up. "The warrior way has failed," he admitted, each word clearly painful to speak. "We will," he paused, struggling with the next words. "We will follow humanity's lead in this crisis." Kate nodded, keeping her face neutral despite the victory. "Captain Marshall's ship has already mapped several possible diversion routes. We'll need about 50 ships equipped with specialized gear. The rest of the fleet should position themselves as a backup perimeter, in case our calculations are wrong." As the council began discussing the logistics of Operation Shepherd, Dr. Wilson moved closer to Kate. "They're actually listening to us," he whispered, surprised. "Amazing what happens when you run out of other options," Kate replied quietly. "But this is just the beginning. The hard part comes next." She looked up at the display showing the swarm's movements. Somewhere in that mass of crystalline death was a pattern, a logic they needed to understand. And for once, humanity's cautious nature might be exactly what the galaxy needed. The Bridge of the Prudence hummed with activity as Captain James Marshall watched 50 ships move into position around the Void Locust swarm. Each vessel had been fitted with special electromagnetic pulse generators and chemical dispensers designed to mimic the natural signals the creatures seemed to follow. "All ships report ready, Captain," Linda West announced from her station. "Operation Shepherd is go." James nodded, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The swarm filled most of the screen, a living cloud of crystalline shapes moving through space. They had grown even larger after consuming the warrior fleet's remains. "Begin Phase 1, he ordered. "Launch the decoy drones." Small unmanned vessels shot out from the fleet's positions, each releasing a carefully calculated mixture of electromagnetic waves and chemical markers. The humans had spent days studying how the Void Locusts communicated within their swarm, and now they were speaking their language. "Drones in position," Linda reported, releasing control signals. Now, everyone on the bridge held their breath as they waited to see if their theory was correct. The front edge of the swarm began to shimmer, crystalline wings catching starlight as millions of creatures reacted to the new signals. "Movement detected," the sensor officer called out. "The swarm is responding." Slowly, like a river changing course, the massive swarm began to turn. The drones led them away from their original path, which would have taken them through 3 heavily populated systems. General Kraz's voice came through the communication system. He and several other warrior race representatives were observing from their remaining ships. "They're actually following your lures, like common animals. All living things follow patterns," James replied calmly. "The key is understanding those patterns instead of trying to break them." The operation continued smoothly for several hours. The swarm followed the network of decoy drones, moving exactly as Dr. Wilson had predicted. But then something changed. "Captain," Linda's voice was tense. "We're detecting increased energy readings from the swarm's core. They're becoming agitated." James saw it too. The neat formation was starting to break up, with smaller groups of locusts moving erratically. "Dr. Wilson, what's happening?" The xenobiologist studied his readings intently. "The signal's too strong," he realized. "We're pushing them too fast. They're starting to resist." "All ships, fall back," James ordered immediately. "Reduce signal strength by 40% and maintain distance. Fall back." General Kraz sounded outrage. "Just when they're showing weakness." "This isn't about weakness or strength," James replied sharply. "We're guiding them, not fighting them. Sometimes you need to step back to keep control." The human fleet executed a perfect fighting retreat, something they had practiced countless times. Each ship moved backward in perfect coordination, maintaining their formation while keeping a safe distance from the agitated swarm. Gradually, the Void Locusts calmed down. Their erratic movements smoothed out, and they resumed following the decoy signals, though now at a slower pace. "Amazing," one of the alien observers muttered. "They make retreat look like a dance." Linda smiled at her console. "We've had a lot of practice. Humans learned long ago that sometimes the best way to win is to step back and try again." The operation continued through several more minor adjustments. Each time the swarm showed signs of stress, the fleet would retreat and adjust their approach. The warrior races watched in growing amazement as the humans demonstrated a level of coordination and control they had never achieved in battle. "Update from the forward scouts," Linda reported after several more hours. "The alternate corridor is clear. We can start guiding them into the new route." James nodded, allowing himself a small smile. "Send word to Admiral Thompson. Phase 1 is successful. We can begin planning for Phase 2. He looked at the tactical display, where the massive swarm now moved peacefully along their new course. The humans had achieved in one day what the warrior races couldn't do with all their military might. They had changed the course of an unstoppable force. Not through strength or courage in battle, but through understanding, patience, and the wisdom to know when to step back. Perhaps now the galaxy would begin to see that there were different kinds of strength, different forms of courage. And sometimes, the most powerful force in the universe was the ability to think before you act. Dr. Robert Wilson sat in the Prudence's science lab, surrounded by holographic displays showing hundreds of data points collected from the Void Locust swarm. 3 days of guiding the creatures had given them more information than anyone had gathered in the past 1,000 years. "Look at this pattern," he said, pointing to a recurring wave in the data. The lab team gathered around, including 2 alien scientists who had finally asked to join the research. The swarm isn't just moving through space. They're following energy currents, like salmon swimming upstream. Linda West, taking a break from bridge duty, leaned forward. "Energy currents. In space. Ancient ones," Robert explained, expanding the display. "We've mapped their attempted course against historical star charts. These creatures are following paths that existed millions of years ago, before some of these star systems even formed." The door slid open, and Captain James Marshall walked in. He looked tired but satisfied. Operation Shepherd had been working better than anyone expected. "Tell me you found something useful, Doctor." Robert nodded excitedly. "Captain, we've been looking at this all wrong. The Void Locusts aren't invaders or mindless destroyers. They're migrants, following paths burned into their species' memory over millions of years of evolution." He brought up a new display, showing the swarm's movement overlaid with ancient star maps. "See these intersections? Their original migration route would have taken them through empty space. But our colonies, our space stations, our mining operations, we've built them right in their path." One of the alien scientists, a member of a warrior race who had introduced himself as Scholar Rex, spoke up. "So they attack our installations because we're in their way. Like how ancient land animals would attack settlements built on their migration routes." "Exactly," Robert said. "And look at this." He showed readings from their latest scans. Their crystalline bodies aren't just for protection. They're solar sails and energy collectors. These creatures feed on specific types of stellar radiation. They need to follow these paths to survive. James studied the data carefully. "Can we use this? Find them a new route that doesn't go through populated space." Robert pressed a few buttons, and a new map appeared. "That's the amazing part. Their original route. It's actually more efficient than the current path they're trying to follow. Look here." The display showed a complex network of energy currents flowing through space. Most were faint, but one path glowed brightly. "This is their ancestral migration route," Robert explained. "It passes through areas of space rich in the exact type of radiation they need. But over the last 1,000 years, we've basically built walls across their highway." Linda caught on first. "So if we could show them the old route, we could solve this crisis permanently," Robert finished. "No more conflicts, no more destroyed colonies. They get their migration path back. We keep our settlements safe." James was already reaching for his communicator. "Admiral Thompson needs to see this. How sure are you about these findings?" Robert looked at his alien colleagues, who nodded in agreement. "We've cross-referenced everything. Scholar Rex even found ancient records from his people describing similar swarm sightings, following the exact path we've mapped. This isn't a theory. It's a fact." The captain smiled. "Good work, all of you. This is exactly what we needed." He turned to leave, then paused. "Scholar Rex, I'm curious. Your people are known as warriors. How does it feel to solve this through science instead of combat?" The alien scientist stood straighter, his warrior heritage showing in his stance. "Captain, my people believe in honor above all. For centuries, we thought honor could only be found in battle. But these past days have taught me something. There is great honor in understanding your enemy well enough to make them no longer your enemy." James nodded approvingly. "Doctor, prepare your findings for presentation to the council. Linda, send word to the fleet. We're going to need to adjust our shepherding route." As the team got back to work, Robert looked at his displays again. Somewhere in the complex dance of energy and crystal, ancient instinct, and modern necessity, they had found not just a solution, but a lesson. Sometimes, the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemy, but from understanding them well enough to make peace possible. Admiral Kate Thompson stood before the combined fleet, now grown to nearly 200 ships. The warrior races had sent their remaining vessels not to fight, but to help. It was a change nobody could have predicted a week ago. "The plan is complex but achievable," she explained, pointing to the holographic map showing their current position and the swarm's ancient migration route. "We'll create an artificial energy corridor using our ship's modified engines. Think of it as building a temporary bridge to guide them back to their natural highway." The Prudence led the operation, its sensors monitoring the swarm's every reaction. Captain James Marshall watched as ships moved into position, creating a vast network of energy beacons stretching across the void. "First line of beacons active," Linda reported from her station. "Energy signature matches the ancient pathway readings." The swarm's response was immediate. Millions of crystalline bodies shifted, their wings catching the artificial energy like sails in the wind. The front of the swarm began to turn, drawn to the familiar signal their species had followed for millions of years. "Second line, activate," James ordered. More beacons lit up, creating another segment of the energy bridge. The swarm followed, like a river finding its old course. In the observation room, Dr. Wilson worked with Scholar Rex and other scientists, monitoring the creature's behavior. "It's working better than we hoped," he said excitedly. "They recognize these energy patterns. It's coded into their very being." But not everything went smoothly. Halfway through the operation, a group of void locusts suddenly broke away from the main swarm, heading toward one of the beacon ships. "Energy fluctuation in Beacon 7. Linda's voice was tense. "They're drawn to the power source." "Beacon 7, fall back," James ordered immediately. "Auxiliary ships, move up to strengthen the corridor walls." The crew of Beacon 7 began their retreat, but the ship's modified engines were already strained from generating the energy corridor. They moved too slowly. "They're not going to make it," someone muttered on the bridge. Then another ship shot forward, one of the warrior race vessels. Its captain's voice came through the comm system. "We'll draw them off. Our engines are stronger." "No," James called out. "Don't engage them directly. That's not the way." But instead of attacking, the warrior ship performed a perfect fighting retreat, just as they had seen the humans do. They pulled the breakaway group back toward the main swarm using careful maneuvers and controlled energy pulses. "They learned," Linda said softly. "They actually learned from us." Step by step, beacon by beacon, the fleet guided the swarm toward their ancient path. Ships worked in perfect coordination, human and alien crews moving like dancers in a complicated performance. When problems arose, they retreated and tried new approaches. When sections of the energy corridor weakened, they reinforced them together. Hours passed. The operation demanded complete focus from every crew member. They were attempting something never done before, recreating an ancient space lane through artificial means. Finally, after what seemed like endless careful maneuvers, the swarm reached the intersection point. Here, the artificial corridor they had created met the actual energy current that remained from their original migration route. "Energy readings are off the charts," Dr. Wilson reported from the lab. "This is it. This is their true path." Everyone watched as the void locusts reached the intersection. For a moment, the massive swarm seemed to pause, hovering between the artificial guide path and the ancient route. Then, like water finding its natural course, the swarm flowed into the energy current. Their crystalline bodies lit up with a bright, pulsing glow as they connected with the path their ancestors had followed for millions of years. "They're moving along the original route," Linda confirmed, her voice full of wonder. "Course projections show they'll completely bypass all colonized systems." A cheer went up across the fleet. Human crews celebrated alongside their alien counterparts. They had done it. not through force of arms or glorious combat, but through understanding, patience, and cooperation. "Send word to the council," Kate ordered, allowing herself a small smile. "Tell them Operation Shepherd is entering its final phase. The path home has been opened." The Galactic Council chamber felt different now. Where once there had been mockery of human caution, now there was thoughtful silence. Where there had been boasts of combat prowess, now there was quiet reflection. The warrior races had learned something that would change their cultures forever. Admiral Kate Thompson stood in the center of the chamber, but this time she wasn't alone. Captain James Marshall, Dr. Wilson, and even Scholar Rex stood with her. The displays around them showed the void locust swarm moving peacefully along their ancient migration route, far from any populated systems. "The operation was a complete success," Kate reported. "The swarm is fully reconnected with their ancestral path. Our long-range scans show they're already returning to their normal migration patterns." "And the energy corridor?" Thax asked, his metallic scales now shining with their old luster. "Will it need to be maintained?" Dr. Wilson stepped forward. "No, Council Leader. Once they found their original route, their own passage strengthened the natural energy currents. They're actually repairing the path as they travel. In a few years, it should be as strong as it was millions of years ago." General Kraz stood up. His armor was still scarred from the early battle, but he wore those marks differently now. "I have lived my entire life believing that courage meant never retreating, never showing weakness," he said. "Today, I understand how wrong I was." The general walked down to the chamber floor, standing before Kate. "You humans showed us a different kind of courage. The courage to step back. The courage to think before acting. The courage to understand instead of destroy." Scholar Rex nodded. "My people have thousands of songs about glorious battles," he added, "but none about the glory of preventing a battle through wisdom. Perhaps that should change." Linda West, who had been monitoring communications, suddenly spoke up from her position. "Admiral, we're receiving reports from the outer beacons. They've detected another swarm, about 6 months out from populated space." The warrior representatives tensed, but this time there was no talk of battle fleets or glorious combat. Instead, they looked to Kate. She smiled. "Then we'll set up the guidance beacons early this time. Map their approach, study their patterns, and show them the way home. Just as we've learned to walk away from unnecessary fights, we can help them avoid unnecessary detours." Thax rose from his chair, his voice carrying the weight of official proclamation. "The Council has made a decision. We will establish a permanent task force, combining human scientific knowledge with our ships and resources. Together, we will map all the ancient migration routes and ensure they remain clear. No more colonies will be built across these paths." And he added, looking directly at Kate, "This task force will be led by humanity. For you have shown us that true strength lies not in the ability to win conflicts, but in the wisdom to avoid them entirely." The chamber filled with sounds of agreement. The same representatives who had once mocked human caution now nodded in respect. James leaned close to Kate and whispered, "Did you ever think we'd see this day? Them actually admiring our tendency to retreat." "Not retreat, Captain," she corrected quietly. "Advance in a different direction. That's what humans have always been good at. We just needed the right situation to show the galaxy." As the council session ended and representatives began discussing the practical details of the new task force, Dr. Wilson was updating his research notes. "You know what's interesting?" he said to no one in particular. "The void locusts weren't the only ones who found their way back to an ancient path today." "What do you mean?" Linda asked. "The warrior races. For all their talk of honor and combat, they finally remembered something their ancestors knew long ago. That the greatest victory is the one that doesn't require a single shot fired." Kate looked around the chamber, at humans and aliens working together, planning for peace instead of preparing for war. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe wasn't strength or speed or even courage. Sometimes it was simply the wisdom to know when to take a step back, think, and find a better way forward. The cowards had shown the warriors a new kind of courage, and the galaxy would never be quite the same.